Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. My name is Joe Thomas, and in case you may or may not have noticed, and about half of you didn't, there was an election on Tuesday. Amazingly, in these off years, it's usually only 3/4 of us don't notice, but there was certainly a voter turnout drive resulting in a change in leadership in the Virginia General Assembly. The governor has already taken to the television to tell everyone, don't be afraid, we're only going to come and do pretty much what Beto O'Rourke had threatened to do, and we've got a lot of common sense. The words common sense and comprehensive and universal, they get used, and those are friendly words. To talk to us a little bit about what we can do, because a lot of people I know this week have felt like all hope is lost. We've reached out to Philip Van Cleave, president of the Virginia Citizens Defense League. Defense is a word we like. And Philip, thank you for joining us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. And, I guess defense will be something we'll be doing a lot of for the next couple of years.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
With that mess.
Talk about the process, and I've mentioned this, that there are things written into the way the Virginia government works that will give the Second Amendment believers and those who believe in self-defense and the right to bear arms the opportunity to, if their representatives do it correctly, keep a lot of these legislative attempts at infringing on our rights at bay. And what is the VCDL doing to as they marshal their efforts before January?
Well, one of the things that we do have is the right to keep and bear arms is protected and enumerated in both the federal Constitution as the Second Amendment, and even more clearly in the Virginia Constitution of Article 1, Section 13. Similar to the Second Amendment, but it clarifies that it says a well-regulated militia, and in Virginia we add consisting of the body of the people, and that's everybody. We're all considered to be part of an unregulated militia. So we have that and rulings in the U.S. Supreme Court that say, for example, that firearms that are in common use can't be banned. And AR-15s are very much in common use.
Right.
So we have the courts as an option, both of the Virginia courts as well as federal courts, to block and maybe even get an injunction to stop the implementation until a court can rule on things. So, but that's a tough fight, but that is an avenue that's open. One of the things too I'll point out is sometimes some of this stuff is maybe a bit too far for even some of the moderate Democrats. And some of them are still in rural areas or more rural, and they may not wish to go a lot of the places that they were willing to vote for when there was no chance that the bill was going to see the light of day.
Right.
And we'll have to see how a lot of that plays out.
You mean Democrats acting like the Republican majority did once they became the majority? When whoa, what do you mean we're going to actually get to vote? Oh, you didn't tell me any of that was going to happen.
Yes, and they will then own anything that happens. And if you look at the elections, we don't see that it was really about guns. They were trying to say, oh yeah, people, it's a referendum on guns. It really wasn't. Some of the absolute strongest and embattled Republicans that were solid and big on guns, like Amanda Chase, she won almost double digits.
Mark Obenchain and Rob Bell, who led the crime commission in the hearings on all the gun legislation, they both won re-election as well. Bryce Reeves. So let's circle to. What you mentioned is, the conservative or middle of the road Democrats. How powerful do you think is membership in the party right now? And we're talking about post Terry McAuliffe Virginia Democrats, to sway them from even the days when Cree Deeds had the NRA endorsement in the gubernatorial race over the Republican Bob McDonnell.
Yeah, it's kind of we're doing some analysis on this, trying to look at some of the more reasonable people for our members in their districts to reach out to. And at the end of the day, this is going to be. I mean, the thing that needs to be pointed out to the Democrats is gun control hits minorities and women the hardest.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's not what their goal is, then they may want to rethink that also.
Oh, yeah.
The thing is, everything they've been proposing affects people like you and me, people who don't commit crimes. That doesn't make any sense. If they want to focus on something, they need to focus on something that will affect criminals and criminals only. Then they could get some support. But things that affect you and me, that's stupid. That's not going to help with they claim they're trying to do something about violence. Well, you and I aren't the people that commit violence.
And we've talked in the past with some of the proposals, and especially the one that bothers me the most in liberty feelers is that when they say universal background checks, I'm more concerned with the phrase universal background more than I am the word check, because I don't want the government creating a universal background on each one of its citizens. Number one, I don't trust them to. But number two, that really has to be where they go before they start doing universal background checks. And that is as un-American as the Fourth Amendment.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things in there that they are pushing for that give the government again more control than it should have. The founding fathers, would be screaming at us, we're going the wrong direction with this. The government shouldn't be getting bigger; it should stay small, very focused on a few key missions. But boy, the liberty that we have now is nothing like the liberty we had in the 50s and 60s. It's all being whittled away by this, that, and the other. I think you'd have to really go back then to look around to see how regulated things are now.
Oh, I agree with you, and often at our own request or our consent, at least, for convenience sake. Yeah.
Often, well, the way government gets power is it forever says, oh, we need to do this to protect people. We've got, and that's how they continue to accumulate power. They don't end up really protecting anybody very much. There may be a few exceptions out there, but it's how they yell that they need this to get power. And anytime they say they need a tool, especially when they say the police need a tool, that tool comes out of your liberties every single time. That tool is inevitably some way to try to get around the Bill of Rights to make the police have an easier job in nabbing people. But in turn, that whittles away what you and I have for protections.
And you mentioned this, that these laws, these common sense background checks and universal gun protections, they're all targeted at people who aren't anywhere closer to committing a crime today than they were yesterday or the day before. And the ones who are committing the crimes are buying these guns, in backroom deals and from black market sellers, and they're stealing them. And these are people who are already in the anonymous world of the crime syndicates.
They don't put their own name down and buy a gun. If push come to shove, they can pay somebody else to go in and have the background check and get whatever gun they want and then turn it over to them once they leave the store.
Which, by the way, is also illegal already in Virginia to do a straw purchase.
It's illegal federal and in Virginia.
Mentioned this the last time we spoke. Philip Van Cleave of the Virginia Citizens Defense League. And before I get into what I wanted to ask you about, I want to remind, now more than ever is an overused phrase in broadcasting, but if you're a Second Amendment believer, regardless of the political party you're in, And even if you're not in one, now is the time to be a member of a group like Virginia Citizens Defense League more than ever before, because of things that they're going to do towards preparing lobby days and the ability to target even Democrats in the House and Senate, and not just count on a Republican majority anymore. And you've been around long enough, Phil, that you know how to work this when the Republicans aren't in the majority.
Yeah, when I first started, the Democrats controlled both the House and the Senate back in the 90s.
Right. You've been around long enough to remember the last time we had a Democrat governor and a Democrat House and Senate. So.
Yeah, so of course it's a slightly different mix. We have less of the rural Democrats that were really strong on guns. They've sort of faded quite a bit. But then again, they were in the minority, and that can change things when you're in the majority. Like I say, I think we just have to see how some of this plays out. And yes, being a member is critical. If we're going to go to the courts, we're going to, big membership helps.
Yeah.
It's in many ways. Right now, we're up about 25% in membership from where we were last year, but that's nowhere near where we need to be. We need to have a huge force. So when we show up, they know we're representing a massive number of people.
Yeah.
There are 660,000 concealed handgun permit holders alone. If they would just join us, you talk about a powerful force down there. I don't know if there'd be much that could compete with us.
Well, and also, if a lot of these need to be adjudicated through the courts, that costs money as well. And
oh, yes, it does.
And so membership. So I wanted to talk about the process going forward. And we mentioned in the news this week that Kirk Cox will not seek a leadership position in the minority party. I've promoted several very good common sense people who I think are excellent at working the system as a member of the minority party and able to get things done even without a block majority. Are there folks that you, even in this short turnaround, that you would like to see try to take a more active leadership role in the Republican parties that might be able to bring some of those middle of the road, or at least Second Amendment believing Democrats on board?
Well, I'd have to think about that quite a bit. The Republicans have some very strong people on the Second Amendment. Nick Freitas, for example. I don't know if he has any interest in being, like a minority leader, since Kirk Cox is not wanting to take that position. I'm sure that Delegate Todd Gilbert will figure into the equation somehow. I haven't heard what his plans are, however.
We've talked about the judicial process and how is it important to remember that we're now in a world where there have been so many judges on the lower court levels appointed by the president that even rulings in favor of Donald Trump have come out of all places, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, so that if you do need to take what may be an unconstitutional attempt on our Second Amendment away, Phil, we're facing a more friendly court structure?
I think we are, yes. And indeed, if they push us into taking these to the courts and we get a good ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court, we could end up making the country better for a whole lot of other states besides just Virginia. Mm-hmm. So, and I think they need to be very careful because there have already been Supreme Court rulings. We have the Second Amendment is there; it applies to us as individuals. We knew that from the beginning, but the court finally actually came out and laid that out in a little bit more pure English over the last decade. Mm-hmm. So. That's it's gonna be interesting, and we may end up making some lemonade out of lemons.
Well, and I certainly think that we can all fall prey to the comforting feeling of, oh, they're always going to be out there looking out for us in our legislator, and all of a sudden we wake up one Wednesday morning and it's all changed. And you're right, it wasn't. And I'm truly concerned that this rash of Commonwealth's attorneys races that George Soros took some great interest in. Washington Free Beacon chronicled, even with a day to go before the election, he brought up $600 and something thousand in to help the Get Out the Vote campaign, was really sort of a catfishing approach towards getting some of the House and Senate seats associated with these Commonwealth's attorneys or in the same neighborhoods, flipped without the conservatives catching on that he was doing it. But there's also a social justice compartment to gun rights as well. While these Commonwealth's attorneys were all talking about survival crime and mass incarceration, you mentioned it earlier, the poor community, if there's no rule of law, the poor community is the one that's going to suffer the most. Absolutely,
yeah. And that's been the history forever on stuff. The poor community always takes it on the chin. And the Democrats will be leading the charge to do that if they push all this gun control. Yes, it'll be affecting you and me, but it's really going to affect them. And especially when you talk about people that have very little money. As we say, they're poor. Some of them would be lucky to be able to get a gun to protect themselves, and they need a gun more than you and I combined. Yeah. Because they actually are forced to live in dangerous areas. They just can't afford to get out of it. They could be wonderful people, but they just don't have the money.
Well, and the cost of defending yourself, if you defend yourself, because there's the moment of you defending yourself with your firearm, and then the court proceedings you're going to have to defend that defense with. Phil, that's another whole side of the Second Amendment, that you're guilty, and you have to prove you're innocent.
Well, in Virginia, if it's really clear that it was self-defense, you may not get charged, but you can't count on that. You have to count that it won't be clear and they're going to charge you. Yeah, you've got that, and then you've got, if you want to get a concealed carry permit, then you've got to cough up $50, and they may try to raise that fee. That's not going to affect you and me. I'll still be able to afford one if they make it $1,000, but other people aren't.
That's why. The VCDL, it's vcdl.org. Are you holding any events that people can find out, and maybe join in? And if they were curious or they've heard us talk to you in the past, but they felt like, I don't need to join that group, but now more than ever they realize that your advocacy and your lobbying day expertise is going to be priceless. Are there going to be anything, or should they just go to the website vcdl.org to find out more?
Yeah, VCDL.org has got a calendar, and you can see a lot of stuff. We just we came out to Charlottesville and played a good Second Amendment film that talked about how important it is socially and so forth, and as a right, as an important right. But we just did that back on October 31st. So and we'll probably be doing some more things in Charlottesville over time. But go to the website. We're at gun shows. Occasionally we're at other things. We're sometimes at special events that are held around the state, because that allows us to reach out to people that don't go to gun shows.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Although I have a feeling any gun shows that are going to take place between now and, say, January might be a little busier than usual.
Oh yeah, yes, they will be. I talked to one of our dealers, and she said the phones haven't stopped ringing.
Yeah.
So, yep. Maybe people waking up a little bit late, too. VCDL was screaming about all this for the last year, and I guarantee a whole bunch of people never heard the message or didn't heed it.
Philip Van Cleave of the Virginia Citizens Defense League on this week's Freedom and Prosperity Radio. What about things like these backdoor attempts to regulate ammunition? I think Joe Biden, as a presidential candidate, has talked about a 100% tax on the ammunition that I believe, and I don't think we've ever talked about it. I believe that a firearm is not a firearm until it's loaded. It's just a piece of metal that's shaped like a gun until it actually has the munitions in it. So I don't think the Second Amendment applies to an unloaded firearm. I believe the ammunition is part and parcel protected by the right to bear arms. But what about some of these backdoor attempts and people saying, well, we're not taking away the guns, but we're going to make it prohibitively expensive to get the bullets for them?
Yeah, and again, it's the war on the poor, isn't it?
Yeah.
You and I will still be able to buy bullets, maybe not as many, but not the poor. So, and the battle goes on. But yeah, they're doing anything they can think of. They're trying to be as creative as possible to find some way to disarm the public, because you cannot do some of the things they want to do if the people in the country are armed, because they won't tolerate becoming communist or whatever. Mm-hmm. So that's the ultimate goal, is to disarm us. That's at least what the people high up really want. Now, do all Democrats want that? No, but that's ultimately where the bigwigs are pushing us.
Mm-hmm. Well, we talked a little bit about the courts, and one of the things that worries me about the abstract of the impeachment process in Washington is that I believe if they're capable of, in some way, shape, or form, torturing the high crimes and misdemeanors to include, he just doesn't understand how things are done here, which seems to be the strongest accusation, is the president doesn't do things the way he's supposed to. But regardless of that, could this be used against his judges that he's appointed? We talked about how the lower courts have all these conservative judges that the president has been appointing and getting passed through the Senate. Could they be facing impeachment in some sort of strange, tortured guilt by association, Philip? In just your thought,
I don't think so. At least I'm not getting that kind of reading, but I could be wrong. I haven't been watching that closely. What they really want to do is get him out of there so he'll stop appointing all these judges, because he's starting to put the system back the way it was supposed to be. Yeah. And people that will, interpret the Constitution and not throw their own personal politics into those interpretations. So, they want him out. That's one reason. That's the biggest push. They're really watching this happen and scaring the heck out of them. Go ahead.
We've chronicled this, and with Michael Bloomberg getting into the race, and he's been one of the most ardent anti-gun campaigners. I mean, he's sort of moved into the Beto O'Rourke slot on the Democratic stage at this point as the most vocal. I think it was Pete Buttigieg, or however you pronounce his name, even said to Beto O'Rourke, why don't you take a shot at taking the Second Amendment out? There is an amendment process, but that being said, we've watched Michael Bloomberg send, these shadow attorneys general to Mark Herring's office, Chris Horner at the EE Legal and the Legal Defense Fund have chronicled in terms of using them against the climate deniers, to target those organizations that might fund climate deniers. But do you worry that once his process has been sort of sanctified by use, now that we don't have a House that's going to fight against paying these AGs out of state money, that he could do the same thing with anti-gun AG assistants that are paid off the books through his little foundation at NYU? Oh,
sure. Oh, absolutely. I wouldn't be surprised if they hadn't snuck a few people in anyhow already, based upon, the way the AG's office acts. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course, him running for president, that should be funny. He tried that before, and he didn't get very far. He's not a beloved person in the country. Bloomberg has got the Napoleonic syndrome. He's actually fairly short.
Yes,
and I think he just loves controlling everything around him, because maybe that's how he'll deals with insecurities. I mean, doesn't even want you drinking sugary drinks
Yeah.
as if that's his business. It's beyond crazy.
Yeah,
It
it
not beloved.
manifested
So
when he was mayor.
He won't go anywhere.
I was borrowing a studio at the WOR radio networks back years ago when he was still mayor of New York, and I was there doing my radio show back to Virginia, and I was up in New York for a conference, and all of a sudden the plug gets pulled, and all the power goes out into the studio in the middle of a segment, and I said, "What in the world just happened?" I said some dirty words maybe as well, and they said, "We're sorry, we have to kick you out. You can't stay here." I said, "What's the matter?" And they said, "We didn't get you passed through Mayor Bloomberg's security." And he was a hallway away from me, and there was all of a sudden some side of beef in an expensive suit there with what was obviously his city-issued firearm under his jacket that was going to escort me out of the building because Michael Bloomberg had not vetted me through his private security.
We had a rally one time at an airport protesting him. We knew he was coming in for something. This was like 12 years ago, and he had his little escort team. He was, and people were just standing there holding signs. They weren't even armed. They were just holding signs, and he knew we were there. When they left that hotel, they went the wrong way down a road to avoid going by that group of people holding signs, and then out into the road and gone. I mean, everybody was standing with their mouth hanging open at the craziness. He's truly scared to death of guns, unless they're his guns.
Right.
Then he's okay. He's got like 6 armed guards.
Right.
And
he doesn't want to
everywhere.
touch them. He doesn't want to touch them. But it is a scary time. But I'm truly happy that there are organizations like the Virginia City, and more so. No offense to our friends in Northern Virginia, but I feel more comfortable knowing that your organization, the VCDL, is around, Philip, and this is no faint praise, than I am about the NRA and some of the political battles that they seem to have caught themselves up in internally. And so again, I encourage anyone to find out more about you at vcdl.org. Look them up. Find them at the gun show that you might be going to. And I do deeply appreciate you jumping in and doing a little post-election coverage on here. Real quick, Bryce Reeves is going to be on the next segment. We're going to talk about redistricting because I really think that's deeply at what George Soros wanted to do with the General Assembly here is get the majority so that they could write the redistricting. If they can get Virginia gerrymandered to the point where maybe it's instead of 6-5 Republican Democrat or 5-6, make it 7 or even 8 Democratic districts. Do you think they'll ever move against the Second Amendment and try to amend it in the Constitution?
I don't think so. I don't think so. It's quite a bit that has to be done, and you still, I believe, are going to have to get public input on that. And at the polls, as I recall, they have to vote to change the Constitution. I don't think so, but there could be a very real danger that they could put themselves in power for a very, very long time. And and as you said, Bryce Reeves is a good example of somebody that was very strong on guns, and he got reelected, just one of many that just shows it wasn't as much about guns. The redistricting is what I think had more to do with the result of those elections than anything. When you look at who lost, they were almost all redistricted.
Yeah, it was redrawn, the court redraws and everything. Philip, thank you so very much. It's vcdl.org. You have a wonderful weekend, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Philip Van Cleave from the Virginia Citizens Defense League. As mentioned, re-elected Senator Bryce Reeves on the new majority, working with the new majority and redistricting. And will that constitutional member, let's not forget, last session they passed a constitutional amendment to create this nonpartisan redistricting commission. That has to go through another General Assembly, and it's a radically different one. Will it move forward? Coming up next on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.